Have you ever caught yourself in the middle of an argument, using the exact words your parent used, in the exact same tone, and thought, wait, when did I become them? Or found yourself attracted to the same type of relationship that hurt you before, even though you swore it would be different this time? These moments can feel unsettling, like you're watching yourself from outside, wondering, why do I keep doing this? Carl Jung spent his life studying these patterns, not to tell us we're helpless, but to show us something liberating, that awareness is the first step toward genuine choice. The uncomfortable truth isn't that we have no free will. It's that much of our behavior runs on autopilot, shaped by experiences we don't remember, influenced by patterns we didn't choose. But here's what changes everything. Unlike actual autopilot, we can wake up, we can observe these patterns, and observation itself begins to create space for different choices. This isn't about discovering you're trapped. It's about discovering you have more agency than you realized, once you understand what's actually driving your decisions. Today, we'll explore Jung's insights, not as a dark revelation of helplessness, but as a map toward greater self-determination. Because the real question isn't, do I have free will? It's how can I expand my capacity to choose consciously rather than react automatically? And Jung offered practical answers. The journey starts with curiosity, not fear. Are you ready to look at what's been operating beneath your awareness? Not to feel powerless, but to reclaim the power you've always had? Let's start with something everyone can relate to. Think about your last conflict with someone close to you. In the heat of the moment, did you respond the way you genuinely wanted to? Or did you find yourself falling into a familiar script? Maybe you shut down emotionally, even though you wanted to communicate. Maybe you got defensive, even though you knew it would escalate things. Maybe you people-pleased, even though you wanted to set a boundary. These aren't signs that you lack free will. They're signs that you have habitual patterns, learned responses that developed for good reasons, often to protect you when you were younger and had fewer resources. Jung called these patterns, and understanding them is empowering, not depressing. Here's the key difference. A pattern is not a prison. A pattern is simply a well-worn path your mind takes automatically. And once you can see the path clearly, you can choose whether to keep walking it or create a new one. Think of it like this. When you first learned to drive, every action required conscious attention, but eventually it became automatic. That automation is useful most of the time, but imagine if circumstances changed, if you moved to a country where they drive on the other side of the road. Suddenly, that automatic behavior becomes a problem. The solution isn't to feel helpless about your automatic responses. It's to bring conscious awareness to them so you can choose when to follow the habit and when to do something different. Jung's insight was that most people live their entire lives on autopilot, never realizing they could bring conscious awareness to their patterns. But the moment you do, even just observing without judgment, something shifts. You're no longer fully identified with the pattern. You're the one witnessing it. And that witnessing creates space for choice. Meet Sophia, a 29-year-old architect who prided herself on being independent, rational, and self-aware. She'd done therapy, read self-help books, understood her childhood intellectually, but she kept running into the same wall. Despite all this knowledge, she found herself repeating patterns she thought she'd resolved. In relationships, she'd initially be open and authentic, but as things got closer, she'd find herself pulling away, becoming critical, finding reasons why it wouldn't work. In her career, she'd take on ambitious projects, but somehow sabotage them just before completion. She knew these were patterns. She could describe them articulately, but knowing about them didn't seem to stop them from happening. The breaking point came when she met Daniel, someone who seemed genuinely compatible. For the first time, she was determined to do things differently. She caught herself starting to pull away and thought, not this time, I'm going to stay present and open. But the harder she tried to force herself to behave differently, the more anxious she became. She felt like she was fighting herself. One night, exhausted from this internal battle, she had a dream. In it, she was in a beautiful house, but kept finding locked rooms. When she finally found a key and opened one, instead of something terrible, she found a child's bedroom with a scared little girl sitting in the corner. The girl looked up and said, "I was just trying to keep us safe." Sophia woke up with a profound realization. Her patterns weren't enemies to be defeated. They were protective mechanisms that had served her well once, but now needed to be understood and updated, not fought against. This shifted everything. Instead of "why do I keep doing this?" she started asking, "What was this pattern trying to protect me from? Does that threat still exist? If not, can I gently create a new response?" Let's clarify what Jung actually believed, because it's often misrepresented. Jung's famous quote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate," is not a proclamation of determinism. It's an invitation to awareness. He wasn't saying, "You have no control, give up." He was saying, "You have more control available than you realize, but first you need to see what's actually happening beneath your awareness." Think of the unconscious not as a puppet master controlling you, but as the vast library of your accumulated experiences, learning, and adaptive responses. It contains incredibly valuable information about what worked to keep you safe, what strategies helped you survive, what patterns helped you fit in and be loved. The problem isn't that this library exists. The problem is when we operate purely from it without ever consciously examining whether those old strategies still serve us. A child who learned that staying quiet and invisible kept them safe from an angry parent develops a pattern of hiding their true feelings. That was genuinely adaptive then. But as an adult in healthy relationships, that same pattern becomes limiting. They're still running the same program, even though the circumstances have completely changed. Jung's concept of individuation. The process of becoming more fully yourself isn't about escaping your unconscious, it's about integrating it. It's about bringing awareness to these automatic patterns, understanding where they came from, honoring that they once served you, and then consciously choosing whether to keep them or update them. This process doesn't eliminate your unconscious patterns, it transforms your relationship with them. You move from being run by them to working with them. From "this is just who I am" to "this is a pattern I learned and I can choose how to work with it." Jung's concept of the shadow is often presented as something dark and threatening, but it's more accurately understood as all the parts of yourself you've learned to disown, usually not because they're bad, but because they weren't acceptable in your early environment. If you grew up in a family where anger was forbidden, you might have pushed your natural assertiveness into the shadow. If vulnerability was seen as weakness, you might have hidden your need for connection. If ambition was considered selfish, you might have suppressed your drive to achieve. These disowned parts don't disappear. They show up in indirect ways. That's why the person who prides themselves on being nice might have dreams where they're aggressive. Why the one who values rationality might have unexpected emotional outbursts. Why the self-proclaimed humble person might secretly judge others harshly. The shadow reveals itself in our strong reactions to others. When someone's behavior bothers you intensely and disproportionately, it's worth asking, am I seeing in them something I've disowned in myself? This isn't always true, but it's often revealing. Sophia realized her criticism of partners who were too needy was actually about her own disowned need for support. She'd learned early that needing help was weakness, so she pushed that part of herself into shadow. But it didn't go away. It just showed up as harsh judgment of others who expressed needs openly. The liberating part, when you recognize a shadow element, you don't have to act it out unconsciously anymore. Sophia didn't need to become clingy or demanding. She just needed to acknowledge, I also have needs for support, and that's human, not weak. Once she could accept this in herself, her judgment of others softened, and she could actually receive care when it was offered. Here's where Jung's psychology becomes genuinely empowering. Awareness itself creates choice. When you're operating purely on autopilot, you have one option, the automatic response. But the moment you become aware that you're about to follow a pattern, something profound happens. You now have at least two options: follow the pattern or don't. Even if you choose to follow it, you're now choosing rather than just reacting, and that makes all the difference. Sophia experienced this directly. She noticed that every time Daniel expressed wanting more closeness, she felt a surge of anxiety and the urge to create distance. Previously, she would just follow that urge, automatically find reasons to be busy, pick a fight, go cold. But now, with awareness, she could observe, here's the anxiety, here's the urge to distance. Interesting. Just naming it changed her relationship to it. She wasn't trying to force herself to feel differently or immediately behave perfectly. She was just witnessing the pattern. And in that witnessing, she discovered something surprising. The urge would peak, then naturally subside. She didn't have to act on it. She could wait it out. She could then ask herself, what would I actually prefer to do here, setting aside the automatic response? Often the answer was different from her first impulse. Not always, but often enough to start creating new patterns. This is the key principle. You don't develop free will by muscling through and forcing yourself to behave differently. That's just replacing one automatic pattern with another forced behavior. You develop choice by creating space between stimulus and response, by observing your automatic reactions without immediately acting on them, and then by consciously choosing from a wider range of options. It's a skill that strengthens with practice, like a muscle. I want you to try something this week. Pick one habitual reaction you notice in yourself. It could be getting defensive when criticized, scrolling social media when anxious, or withdrawing when you need connection. Just one pattern. Your task isn't to change it. Your task is simply to observe it. Notice, what's the trigger that starts it? What physical sensations accompany it? Tension, heat, tightness. What thoughts arise automatically? What emotion is underneath? Just observe without judgment, as if you were a scientist studying yourself with curiosity. You might notice, when my partner suggests I'm wrong about something, my chest tightens. I think, here we go again. I feel a mix of fear and anger, and I immediately start building my defense. Just witnessing this, naming it, creates the first crack in the automatic pattern. Don't try to fix it yet. Just see it clearly. Share in the comments. What's one pattern you're committing to observe this week? No judgment, just curiosity. Because awareness is the first step, and it's more powerful than most people realize. The paradox of change is that it happens not by forcing, but by bringing compassionate attention to what is. When you truly see a pattern clearly, it often begins to shift on its own because you're no longer fully identified with it. You're the one observing it, which means you're larger than it. Let's address something important. Yes, you've been influenced by your family, culture, trauma, and conditioning. Jung understood this deeply, but influence is not the same as determinism. Here's the crucial distinction. Your past explains your current patterns. It doesn't excuse them, and more importantly, it doesn't determine your future. Understanding where a pattern came from is valuable. It creates compassion for yourself, helps you see the pattern clearly, and often reveals what it was protecting you from. But understanding alone doesn't keep you trapped. The belief that understanding traps you is actually more limiting than the original pattern. Sophia's therapist helped her understand this. Yes, her pattern of distancing came from a childhood where emotional closeness was followed by disappointment and abandonment. Understanding this explained the pattern. But she then had a choice: continue the pattern because that's just how I'm wired from childhood, or use that understanding as a starting point for creating new responses. She chose the latter, and here's what she discovered. When she stayed present despite the anxiety, when she let Daniel see her vulnerability despite the automatic urge to hide, nothing terrible happened. In fact, the opposite. The connection deepened. And slowly, her nervous system started learning. Oh, closeness doesn't always lead to abandonment. Sometimes it leads to security. This is neuroplasticity in action. Your brain remains capable of learning new patterns throughout your life. The old patterns have deep grooves from years of repetition, but new patterns can be created. It requires patience and practice, but it's absolutely possible. Your past is part of your story, it's valuable information, but it's not your destiny unless you choose to keep it as such. Jung saw dreams not as random firings of neurons, but as the unconscious mind's attempt to communicate in symbol and metaphor. You don't need to become a dream interpretation expert to benefit from this insight. Simple dream attention can be remarkably revealing. Sophia started keeping a dream journal, not analyzing every symbol, but simply noticing patterns. When she was pushing herself too hard at work, she'd dream of being in buildings with unstable foundations or driving cars with failing brakes. Her unconscious was saying, "Hey, this pace isn't sustainable." When she was avoiding a difficult conversation, she'd dream of packages she needed to deliver but kept putting off. The message was clear. These weren't prophecies or mystical communications. They were her own deeper wisdom. The part of her that could see patterns she was too busy to notice consciously, speaking in the language of imagery, because that's how the unconscious communicates. She didn't need to interpret every dream, she just needed to notice themes, and then ask, what might this be telling me about my current life? Is there something I'm not seeing or acknowledging? Often, the answer was obvious once she asked. The value isn't in complex interpretation, it's in paying attention. Your dreams often reveal what you're avoiding, what you truly desire beneath social conditioning, and what patterns are active beneath your awareness. Simply asking, what does this dream might be highlighting, can surface insights your conscious mind was missing. This isn't mysticism, it's practical attention to all the information your mind is processing, not just the conscious portion. Your unconscious often sees things before your conscious mind admits them. Jung's concept of individuation is often misunderstood as becoming some perfect, ideal self. It's actually much more achievable and beautiful than that. Individuation simply means becoming more fully who you actually are, as distinct from who you were conditioned to be. It's peeling away the false layers not to reveal some transcendent being, but to reveal your authentic self, with all its quirks, preferences, gifts, and limitations. Sophia's individuation wasn't about becoming some idealized version of herself. It was about recognizing I was performing independence because I learned emotional needs were shameful. But I actually do want interdependence. I was performing perfection because I learned mistakes meant rejection. But I'm actually okay with being imperfect. I was following a career path that looked impressive because I learned my worth came from achievement. But what I actually love is the creative process, not the status. Each recognition was a small freedom. She didn't have to become someone else. She had to stop being who she thought she should be and start being who she actually was. This is individuation, differentiating between your authentic preferences and your conditioned responses. It's not a destination you reach. It's an ongoing process of checking in. Is this choice aligned with who I actually am, or am I just following an old pattern? Sometimes you'll follow the old pattern, and that's okay. The key is consciousness. You're choosing from awareness rather than operating on pure autopilot. And over time, this creates a life that feels more authentically yours. Not perfect, but genuine. Not without struggle, but with integrity. Not because you escaped your conditioning, but because you became aware of it and gained the freedom to choose what to keep and what to update. A year after Sophia started this process, her life looked surprisingly similar from the outside. Same job, same city, still with Daniel. But internally, everything had shifted. She still had anxious moments, still sometimes defaulted to old patterns, but now she could recognize them. Oh, there's that old urge to distance when things feel too close. And she could choose. Sometimes she'd honor the need for space, which was sometimes legitimate, and sometimes she'd stay present despite the discomfort, which was often growth. The difference was consciousness. She wasn't cured or fixed or perfected. She was simply more aware, and therefore more free. She'd learned to have a different relationship with her patterns. Instead of "this is who I am, I can't help it," she'd think, "this is a pattern I learned, it served me once. Does it serve me now, in this specific situation?" Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Her therapist reminded her, individuation isn't about reaching some enlightened state where you never have unconscious reactions. It's about shortening the lag time between automatic reaction and conscious awareness. At first, you might notice a pattern weeks later, then days, then hours, eventually sometimes in the moment, and occasionally even before it happens. That's the practice, not perfection, but increasing awareness, and therefore increasing choice, not eliminating the unconscious, but learning to work with it consciously, not transcending your humanity, but inhabiting it more fully and authentically. Sophia's relationship with herself had fundamentally changed. She'd moved from self-judgment, "Why do I keep doing this?" to self-understanding, "This pattern made sense once, and I can choose whether it still serves me." And that shift changed everything. We've explored Jung's psychology, not as a dark revelation of helplessness, but as a practical map toward greater self-determination. The key insights: your unconscious patterns exist and influence you. Acknowledging this isn't depressing, it's the first step toward freedom. Awareness itself creates choice. Simply witnessing your automatic reactions begins to create space for different responses. Patterns aren't prisons, they're learned responses that served you once and can be updated. Your past explains your present patterns. It doesn't determine your future unless you choose to let it. Individuation is an ongoing practice, not a destination. It's about increasing consciousness and therefore increasing authentic choice. So here's your invitation. Start with curiosity rather than judgment. Notice one pattern this week. Ask, where did this come from? Does it still serve me? Be patient with yourself. These patterns developed over years. They won't transform overnight, but they will shift with consistent, compassionate attention. If this perspective resonated with you, consider subscribing. The journey of becoming more conscious is ongoing, and we'll continue exploring practical psychology for greater self-awareness and authentic living. And remember, Jung's message wasn't "you're trapped by your unconscious, give up." It was, "Your unconscious has been running the show. Become aware of it, and you'll gain more freedom than you ever imagined possible." That freedom is available. The question is, are you willing to look,